Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Indonesia has been rocked by protests that began with outrage over parliamentary perks and has since grown into wider indictment of economic inequality, elite privilege, and police violence. For President Prabowo Subianto, a year into office, this unrest could very well define his administration. What does he need to do next? Not just to calm the protests in the short term, but also in the long term to prevent deepening instability. Joining me on the show is Usman Hamid, who is the executive director of Amnesty International Indonesia. He also is the founder of the non-profit Public Virtue Institute and is a human rights lawyer and expert counsel at the Indonesian Bar Association. Usman, thank you for being on the show with me today. I understand today there's been more protests, but can we begin by maybe zooming out, looking at what sparked this? Because most news reports are citing that it was the monthly housing allowance for parliamentarians that had sparked nationwide unrest. Do you agree with that? I'm just wondering what, in your view, are the actual underlying drivers behind the discontent?
Yes, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me. I think the allowances for Parliament, which is lavish for allowances of a member of Parliament, is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other public discontents, dissatisfactions of people towards the government and also toward the Parliament. For example, I think in recent years, there has been a regression of Indonesian quality of democracy, the shrinking civic space for protests and for public criticisms, and also the absence of checks and balances, the absence of opposition in the parliament. And thirdly, I think the lack of integrity of our election, and even FIDEM Institute, the Varieties of Democracy Index, has for the first time categorized Indonesia is no longer an electoral democracy, but rather an electoral autocracy, at least in the gray zone area between electoral democracy and electoral autocracy. So this is a bigger picture of what is happening in Indonesia. On the ground, we have seen a number of key issues for the people. For example, almost 100,000 of people losing their jobs. Many drivers of motorbike taxi in Jakarta, for example, and many other parts of Indonesia have been complaining for their livelihood, for the difficulties that they are facing on the daily life. Also, the economic slowdown, the budget cuts, the spending cuts, also the tax increase. So despite of so many what the government called hillerizations of mining, of nickel mining, gold mining, coal mining, the government increased the tax. So the people are asking, where the money come from? Where the money go? Why the government increased the tax for the people, but not increasing the tax for the rich? Why there are so many rich people in Indonesia having issues of tax avoidance and tax evasion? Not to mention the situation in Papua, for example. Papua has never been a real democracy of Indonesia. There has always been the overpresence of the military, the over-exploitation of natural resources, which is now expanded not only in Papua, but also in many other big islands such as Maluku, Sulawesi, and Kalimantan. So people are really dissatisfied with the government performance. And I think with the current administration, the government increased budget on defense, but decreased the budget for education. So people started to feel that the government is not doing things right. The government have to be corrected. So that's the reason why they come up with 17 plus 8 demands. This is not including women's rights activist demands, for example. They are demanding for participation of women, leadership of women, representation of women, equal rights for women, domestic workers, and so on. So there are so many underlying issues below the tip of the iceberg, but below the protest against lavish parliamentary allowances.
Usman, so talk to me about the response from the government, from Prabowo's administration. Prabowo has made some concessions. I think he's responded to some of the triggers, the direct triggers of the protest. But there's also been some criticism about the heavy-handedness of the crackdown, and that may be reflecting on his own kind of military background and his own military instincts. Talk to me a little bit about this. Has he grasped the depth of public anger, and does it show in the response?
I think Prabowo's government has fallen far short in addressing people's demands, in addressing issues and push for meaningful change. Instead of responding to the outcry for justice for the victims of the heavy-handed security approach throughout the demonstrations, Prabowo blaming a terrorist, blaming those protesting his government as those who wants to overthrow his government. So using the terminology of terrorism, anarchisms, and also treasons. So these are things that make things worse. And instead of setting up an investigation team to investigate the deaths of 10 people now, 10 people who got killed during the demonstration, he was trying to make an excuse by explaining that the police was in a difficult situation, and even he granted promotion to the police who are involved in the handling of demonstration with a heavy-handed approach. So instead of responding to public outcry for justice, he preferred to to support the police. So I think this is something that trigger further dissatisfaction. Police brutality in Indonesia and military brutality has been pervasive, with absence of punishment, with absence of accountability. Those who have been involved in the killing of a number of protesters have only been proceeded in a disciplinary mechanism, an internal disciplinary mechanism. It's not being taken into civilian court of law, not to mention a human rights court, which Indonesia has.
Right. So talk to me about how this compares to previous cycle of dissents. I mean, I've read commentators saying that they see echoes of 1998 when the student-led protest toppled the Suharto regime. Do you see similar parallels, meaningful parallels? I'm wondering what this could mean for Prabowo's presidency should he fail to respond more meaningfully to the requests of the protesters.
Yeah. First of all, I think the similarity of what happens in August with 98 is the economic slowdown, the crisis, where people crying for their daily needs. At the same time, government live in a very luxury standard of living, including the lavish parliamentary allowances. And secondly, is a nationwide protest. Of course, with the protest last month, it was triggered by the death of Afan Kurniawan, the motorbike taxi driver who got killed in the demonstration in Jakarta. But I think the scale of the protest has been very similar with what we saw in 1998. The third is the riot. In 98, we had seen riots that took place in a number of cities involving, a number of military personals, and the same with the one that we have seen today. Even Tempo magazine, one of the prominent Indonesian investigative magazine, in this new edition, highlighted the involvement of several military members behind the riots. So it means Indonesia is a long way to go to reform Indonesian military. Indonesia is a long way to go to really have, to really shift or transform from authoritarian regime in before 98 into a really democratic regime. It's been, I've been very grateful to have freedom after the fall of Suharto. I think Indonesia has, has established a number of significant achievement in democracy, but now in the last couple of years, we've seen significant regression. And even many scholars have consensus that Indonesia is now under authoritarianism revival. So
So,
it's a deja vu for me. You know, I was a student activist back in '98. My university was sorry, four students of my university got killed at the time, but it triggered a nationwide protest that toppled down Suharto. And that is something that is quite different for today. At the time, it was clear there was a consensus that the common enemy, the public enemy, is Suharto. Suharto has to step down. But today, I think there are some, you know, some polarization, so to speak, in seeing whether Prabowo should be overthrown or should be toppled down or not.
Right. So could I ask you then what you are watching for next? I mean, what are you watching as the tipping point or things that could spark more unrest or deeper instability? I'm wondering how the government can respond to ensure that this doesn't exacerbate further.
First, I think they should address public demands properly, you know, freezing parliamentary allowances, for example, or canceling any controversial policies. And when it comes to deal with workers, when it comes to do with environment, when it comes to do with indigenous people's rights in Indonesia. And secondly, I think in terms of reallocations of state budgets, I mean, Indonesia and many other countries in the world, including in Southeast Asia, are currently facing economic slowdowns. So Indonesia and any government should have the right priority, and the right priority should be education, healthcare, for example, not defense. Indonesia has too much budget allocation for defense. Indonesia is not having enemy. It's not having even Malaysia is a friend, Singapore is a friend. So you don't have any military enemy today. So you can't increase that defense budget while at the same time decreasing budget for education. So I think the reallocation of fiscal policy, the decrease of tax for people, and the law enforcement process for tax avoidance of the rich, and also tax evasion by the corrupt business circle, I think that has to be the priority. Without all of that, I don't think Indonesia will be in stable democracy in the years to come.
Well, we hope for the very best as we watch our neighbors fight for their country.
For Malaysia too.
Yes, Usman, thank you so much for being on the show with me. I appreciate your time. Usman Hamid there from Amnesty International Indonesia. We'll be right back with more on Consider This. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our conversation about the protests that have gripped Indonesia since late August. What lessons should we, Malaysia, be drawing from our neighbour's crisis? Joining me now is Dr Azmil Mohd Tayeb, Associate Professor at USM's School of Social Sciences. Azmil, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. We spoke to you a year ago with the election or the landslide win of Prabowo. Now, a year into his administration, we're seeing Indonesia's protests said to be ignited by the housing allowance for the parliamentarians, which I might add was 10 times or more than 10 times the country's minimum wage. So I'm just wondering, from where you're sitting, do you think that we are as vulnerable in Malaysia to similar public anger over elite privilege?
Again, thanks for Melisa for having me on the show. Always a pleasure. Yes, I think we are vulnerable, perhaps not as dire as we're seeing in Indonesia right now. Mainly, I think, because Indonesia has a history of protests, more active civil society, more radical, should I say, than us here. But there's always the vulnerability. I think especially when you see the political and economic elites getting more and more detached from the lived experience of the public, with the rising, cost of living, and other poor economic indicators, perhaps. Yeah. So, but I think when it comes to the economy, perhaps it's not as bad as it is in Indonesia. Perhaps that helps to cushion, some of the worst effect that we're seeing. But I think we should not make us complacent to what's going on in Indonesia.
Right.
Especially the makers, yeah.
You are a close watcher of Indonesian politics. You spend a lot of time there. I think slightly more than a year into Prabowo's term. What's your headline assessment, if I may? Where has he met expectations? Where is he falling short? Especially, I'm surprised at how quickly his popularity has fell, given that he had the landslide victory in the 2024 elections.
Yeah, I think when Prabowo won the election last year, he was pretty much riding on the coattail of the former President Jokowi, right? So Jokowi had very high approval rating around the election time. I think it was in the high 70s, so 70%. So I think that really helped to buoy the Prabowo into victory, the landslide victory. But I think now the Jokowi effect is slowly, is no longer there, and now people seeing that, okay, like his own administration, he has to own up to his own policies. So I think that the reality finally sinking in. And I think a lot of his landmark programs, like the free meals for school children, has not been that successful. It's been quite erratic. A lot of cases of food poisoning, and also it doesn't live up to expectation, and it takes up so much money, right? So I think in Indonesia at the time we're seeing Prabowo spending so much money for his flagship program, this free meal, and also not to forget Jokowi's, the capital, new capital Nusantara in Kalimantan. These are all sucking the coffers dry. So in a time when Indonesia is highly leveraged, having to pay foreign debts, for all the infrastructure programs, carried out by Jokowi during his 2 terms, that incurred so much debt. So it means that they have to find revenues from somewhere, and also imposing austerity measures. So I think these are all the combination, austerity measures, and also, imposing new taxes, value-added taxes, and some other taxes that put more burden on the public. I think this really fueled the anger and frustration of the people that culminated in in this protest that we are seeing. And then, of course, the increase in housing allowance. That was the icing on the cake. And then dancing inside the parliament right after they passed if you've seen the video that went viral, the MPs were dancing, celebrating, really fueled the anger. And then, of course, the tragic death of Afan Kurniawan as well. I think that was the catalyst that pretty much, that fuel what we're seeing right now. So, right. Yeah.
Azmil, do you see any similarities or echoes of 1998? It toppled Suharto's regime. Is Prabowo's regime at risk?
Yeah, I think there are, of course, similarities. But there are also differences. Maybe we can start with similarities. In 1998, it was in the thick of the Asian financial crisis, right? So we have that similarity as well, because Indonesia the economy is not doing so well. Especially you can see youth unemployment rate is actually quite high in Indonesia. I think more than quadruple of the national unemployment rate. So, and you can see, you know, most of the protesters are actually young people, right? So people who are just frustrated, angry, and feeling hopeless in this state of economy right now. So that's, you know, why they're out there protesting, right? So you see the similarities as well. But at the same time, there are also differences, because in 1998, there was a clear target, there's a clear objective, which is to force Suharto to step down, right? So you have a clear common enemy, so to speak, right? So for everyone protesting, everyone out in the streets, so the main objective is to force Suharto to step down, right? To force the collapse of the regime. But I think right now it's much more difficult because there's no one tangible villain. I mean, yes, that's Prabowo, but then Prabowo at the same time was democratically elected, so he wasn't an authoritarian figure. I mean, I guess we can. I mean, there are authoritarian tactics that he's been using, but he was democratically. I mean, he's a strongman leader, so, right? So there's, you know, less tangible, you know, enemy, so to speak, you know, target, you know, so people protesting, but to what end, really? But I think you have civil society groups that are actually proposing demands, right? The 17+8 demands that the Indonesian government, the parliament can take up on, you know. So some are more immediate demands, some more short, you know, medium term and long term, right? So we'll see, you know, how far that this government take up this demand, or how seriously they take up the demands from the civil society. Yeah.
Do you not think that there is a risk of the Prabowo administration being toppled? I'm just wondering what is at stake for him now in terms of responding to these demands, in terms of whether Indonesia might deepen its instability at this point in time. Will we keep? I wonder whether he will do what it takes to end the protests currently.
Yeah, I think the way that the protests and then the response of the government has been so far, it doesn't look like the protests will end anytime soon. I mean, because the response actually has been quite heavy-handed. You know, you see they already, I don't know what's the latest count of death, like 10 people died, I think, so far, right? So. Yeah. And then hundreds injured and thousands arrested. There are even people who disappeared, right? So and then there's military getting involved as well, you know, so not just the police. So it's like instead of perhaps you know, adopting more softer approach, you know, right, in appeasing the protesters. I think the Prabowo's administration has been quite heavy-handed, more repressive, and then even when he apologized for the death of Afan Kurniawan, also he sound quite, you know, like unrepentant. You know, there's no contrition, you know, in his speech, because it's like, yes, it's tragic, but at the same time, you know, he also praised the police for doing what's needed to quell the protests and things like that. So even though the police brutality is one of the grievances of the protesters.
So just a question, because we have seen, or history has shown us, that movements can cross borders. So are there regional risks, particularly, that we should be aware of if these grievances of the protesters continue to go unaddressed? We saw, if I just may use the 1998 crisis, it was part of a wider wave of change in Asia after the AFC Reformasi was an example of that. Do you think that Indonesia's protest could resonate in Malaysia? Could there be effects of, maybe I think about labor migration or security cooperation, regional cooperation within ASEAN? Could that have any impact on the region?
Yes, of course. I think we're not, I mean, we're all interconnected in the region, right? We're all interdependent. So I think definitely, I think the perhaps more out migration of Indonesian, perhaps, right? We're already seeing the hashtag kabur aja dulu, they remember like a few months ago, it was trending on social media, right? Because like those the young people who are feeling hopeless, there's nothing they can do in their own country. So there's the trending that is that you have to leave to make a better life for yourself. You have to migrate, right? So perhaps there's going to be more of that. And also it impacts tourism as well, right? Because there are a lot of worry. I mean, even for me personally, I have friends who've been asking me. They have made plans, to go to Indonesia this month, and then say, should we go? Is it safe? Right? Maybe we should just cancel our trip or postpone our trip indefinitely. So there's this concern, about their safety if they go. So I think that affects Indonesian tourism as well. And also, I think at the same time, it also maybe emboldens the civil society in Malaysia, maybe to put on more pressure on the Malaysian government to implement all these reforms that they promise, especially for the PH, Pakatan Harapan promised during the election campaign, right? So, but I think, like I said, our situation is not as dire as in Indonesia, mainly because I think because of the electoral system that they're different, because Indonesia electoral system favors the elites, so you have to be rich to become a candidate in Indonesia. So that's why you see pretty much everyone, I would say, in the parliament, comes from the rich business people or celebrities, right? So we see so many celebrities, right, becoming members of parliament in Indonesia, right? So simply because they're rich, for one, and also they have name recognition. Yeah, because unlike Malaysia, Malaysia is very party-centered, so they choose their own candidates. So we can have like school teachers, we can like ustad, or we can have like retired, pensioners to become candidates, So we have more mixed MPs. So I think that helps a bit, so it doesn't look too elite, or too disconnected like in Indonesia, because when you look at the members of parliament in Indonesia, it's as if like they live in their own like different world, than the rest of the public.
Right. Interesting, Azmil. Thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Dr. Azmil Mohd Tayeb, political analyst at USM School of Social Sciences, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.